What's up, Pitt fans? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel and podcast network. He is Chris Carter. I am Noah Hiles. Chris, a week off for Pitt sports. Nice little break that was needed, really, for the basketball team. But ironically enough, it's all football questions in this week's show. And they did not have a week off. They were pretty busy this weekend, bringing in some coaches for interviews. Depending on when you watch this, these hires might be official by then. To my knowledge, I don't think any are official just yet as of when we're recording, but I was told from some pretty reliable sources that they're all in the mix. And we're going to start with that. But before we do, Mike's Beer Bar is our presenting sponsor. We got to talk about them. Whether if you're in town for a Steelers, Pirates, or a Pitt game, Mike's Beer Bar is right across the street from PNC Park. It has the best selection of beer in town, as well as amazing food options. They have over 20 TVs, and you can catch all of your NFL, college football, Pirates, Penguins, Riverhounds, and Premier League action right at Mike's. Come on in and try one of their 500 different available beers, 300 of them being local beers, as well as 80 different local craft beers available on tap. You can also get a flight to try out every option you can dream of, and trust me, you won't run out of favorites, because I never do, and I'm always there. Try their steak on a stone for an awesome meal where you can choose how hot you'd like your steak cooked with a heated stone right in front of you as you enjoy a night out in Pittsburgh. Come to Mike's Beer Bar and get your sports fix and experience the best bar in Pittsburgh. So, Chris, before we get into everything, I forgot to ask me, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. You know, it's a Monday. We're getting ready to talk about some Steelers shortly after we record this show and watch to see if they keep their playoff hopes alive. And then the next day we get Pitt basketball, man. It's a big sports week.
It is indeed. And the Penguins are playing today, too, at 1 o'clock, I believe.
That's right.
So,
they moved up their game.
It's just it's all over the place. You got to love it. So, all right, let's get into the Pitt talk here. Ray wants to start us off. He says, what are your thoughts on the new assistants Pitt is set to hire? So we reported, I believe it was on Friday, that Pitt is set to hire 3 assistants. Their names are Jeremy Darveau. He is going to be the offensive line coach. He's coming from Western Carolina. Lindsey Lamar is going to be the running backs coach. He's coming from Howard. And Jacob Branowski is going to be the tight ends and special teams coach from Miami of Ohio. Chris, do you want to start here or shall I?
I can start here.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting group of guys that bring in different, levels of experience. I think Branowski is going to be interesting to see, what a guy who's been with, a Power 5 program in Tennessee for a year, but also has bounced around, some of the groups that have been outside of that. I'm interested in Lindsey Lamar too, because he's a receivers coach for Howard and he was just an offensive quality coach before that. So he's never coached a running back room, but when you're a quality control coach, that usually means your job throughout the week is making sure everything stays organized and everyone stays focused. And if you're dealing with a guy who's taught running backs how to catch the ball pretty well, that might be a big part of this offense that we know it's going to prioritize throwing the ball, using the RPO, and setting things up. So that could be a big factor for Pitt's offense. And then as far as Darveau, I like some of the experience that he has, but I'm really intrigued. What does he bring to the table as far as getting Pitt's offensive line to kind of get back to playing at a high level? All 3 guys coming from an interesting track record of their own to get to Pitt. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what tenor they set. With Cade Bell is with this new offensive look.
Yeah, I'll start from the top. Darveau is a guy that is more than familiar with Cade Bell. They've worked at 3 different places together. He was the O-line coach at Valdosta State when Cade Bell coached that team, that offense, to being one of the best offenses in the country. Actually, one of the best offenses in D2 football history, actually. And then when they won a national championship in 2018, they also worked together at South Florida and Western Carolina. So they've worked together at 3 schools. And if you're going to bring one guy over on your offensive staff, if you're an OC, it should be your offensive line coach. You want the guy who understands your blocking schemes. Mm-hmm. Especially, if you look at what Pitt had before at O-line, I don't know how well Dave Borbley would have been able to adjust to what Cade Bell would be running, because there were differences in the many OCs that he's worked with, Borbs has, because he stayed through, I think, 3 different OCs at Pitt. But this would be a totally new challenge, and I think you want familiarity there. So that's what you get with Darveau is a familiar face. Another guy that Cade Bell has ties to is Lamar. They coached for a year together at South Florida. Chris, you pointed out, this is a guy who is a receivers coach. but he played running back and receiver in college. If you're a Big East football junkie like I was back in the day, you remember Lindsey Lamar as the like crazy good kick returner for South Florida. The guy was a problem. He was a 2010 Big East Special Teams Player of the Year. He started at running back for a little bit, and then he also moved to receiver as a full-time starter there. Was just an absolute speed demon. A thing that also I think sticks out with Lindsey Lamar is recruiting potential. Because this is a guy who played and coached in South Florida for most of his career. So he's familiar with recruiting that area. The state of Florida, if you have any pipeline to Florida, that is a benefit.
Yes.
So, and especially if your pipeline pertains to skill. Pitt already has a coach that knows how to recruit defensive linemen well in Florida, but there needs to be more of a skill presence in Pitt's wide receiver and running back room from that state, because that's where the top talent is. So having a guy with, relationships with high school coaches in that area, with trainers in that area, that's beneficial. So that's why I really like the Lindsey Lamar thing. And again, familiarity. He has a prior relationship with Cade Bell. However, my favorite hire of these three, and these aren't official yet, they might be by Tuesday, but we were told by some pretty reliable sources that these are all but a done deal. Jacob Bronowski, I don't know what his ability is to coach tight ends. He's only coached tight ends for 2 years, and it was at Robert Morris. So that's probably going to be a little bit of a work in progress, but this is a massive upgrade on special teams, which was desperately needed. Chris and I, we watched the MAC championship game together. I remember. And that game was won on special teams. Some numbers from that game. The final score was 23-14. Miami of Ohio, which is where Bronowski's coming from, made 3 field goals. So there's the 9 points right there. They averaged 46.8 yards a punt on 6 punts. 4 of those 6 punts were put inside the 20-yard line. They blocked 2 kicks, and their first touchdown of the game was set up by a 20-plus yard return. That was an absolute masterclass on special teams by Miami of Ohio, and it's been that way all season for the Red Hawks. You look, their kicker was the MAC Special Teams Player of the Year. He was also first-team All-MAC kicker. Their punter was second-team All-MAC. Their return man was second-team All-MAC. They performed in all areas of special teams all year. This was a guy who was regarded to as one of the best special teams coaches in the country. He was on 247 Sports list of 30 under 30, one of the best young coaches up and coming. And if you look, a lot of great coaches kind of start off in the MAC, one being the head coach of Pitt right now. He spent some time in the MAC earlier in his career. So he's kind of going through the trajectory, right? He's been at some other Power Fives before this, Tennessee being one of them, Central Florida, and then he gets his first big-time role and thrives in it. I don't know if this guy's going to be here long, but I think this could be a really, really big upgrade at special teams. I like all 3 of these hires too, just because of the familiarity with the system. One, because of proven track record, and all 3 together because they're young, they're new, and I think they're going to just do a lot better in today's modern era of college football. These are guys that have had to use the transfer portal and try to recruit with NIL at Howard, Western Carolina, and Miami of Ohio. And we talk about how Pitt doesn't have the greatest resources. Pitt has more resources than those 3 programs. So I'm excited to see what these guys can do with a little bit of NIL money and some transfer portal guidance and just recruiting in general. I think these are all upgrades. So
yeah, I feel like this is good. This is a chance again to set a new tone there. And one thing about quality control guys, when you talk about Bronowski and what he did when he's a special teams coach and he's doing things like that, and you look at Lindsey Lamar and what he did as a quality control, those are guys for the tenor of the whole team. Those are guys that are going to be tasked with not just coaching their positions, but making sure everyone's kind of working together with keeping the team on the same page, with making sure everything's organized throughout the week. I think that's going to be a big part of this. Is it's not just going to be position coaches per se. These are going to be guys that are helping the overall program as far as being coaches who can be extra voices to boost messages. Not that other guys didn't do that, but I think that's another resource that they're bringing with their background.
We'll move on now. Mike wants to know, how do we think ACC teams will put up against newcomers from the West Coast-ish, SMU, Stanford, and Cal? Also, do you feel it hurts those teams in recruiting with cross-country travels? I'll start here. I I don't see any of these three coming in and competing for an ACC title anytime soon. SMU is probably the best of the three. They're not getting any television revenue. I don't know if that necessarily matters as far as, NIL and stuff like that. And I know they're coming off a good season, but they also just lost to Boston College in the Fenway Bowl. So how legit was that 10 or 11 season that SMU had? As far as Stanford and Cal go, I mean, these are two programs that really have not done well at all since the modern era of college football has come to fruition with the transfer portal and NIL. I think Cal is actually doing okay this offseason in the transfer portal. But the second part of this question kind of explains why I feel the way I feel. They're going to have a really hard time putting a team together that's going to be competitive. Who's going to sign up to play for them? If your NIL resources aren't what they are, they're not going to have the revenue money to have like an amazing coaching staff, I don't think. They're going to have guys plucked away. And I don't know how many kids are going to basically choose to make 4 trips cross country all year. So they might be a one-stop shop where a guy goes there for a year, plays well, transfers out. I could see that being the case a lot. But all three of them have their backs pretty far up against the wall, especially Stanford and Cal. I expect SMU to be the most competitive. I think out of the three, you average 1.5 bowl appearances between this trio pretty much for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think that you're gonna see these three kind of it's gonna take a bit to adapt. So one, it's not just the teams in the ACC traveling out there. These teams got to travel pretty consistently out east, and that's good. That is going to change the tenor of recruiting and the efforts there. It's going to be one of the big questions that I think all conferences start to face as we start to see everyone kind of mesh in together. And that's going to be a major challenge for them. So I'm right with you. I don't see any of these three teams competing for an ACC championship anytime very soon. I think basketball could be very interesting when it comes to these. That could be interesting to see how they adapt there, because the transfer portal just works very differently in basketball. There's still a lot of movement, but you can become a great basketball team with 2 or 3 awesome transfers. It takes a lot more than that to make things happen in football. So I'll be very intrigued to see how their resources pull together. But yeah, I don't see any of these three teams being a danger to strike at the top of the ACC, but I do see them adding to the mix of all the teams that are kind of duking it out week in and week out.
And like I said, just any sort of success that those teams get, they're vulnerable to be plucked from. I mean, you're seeing it now with we talked about the revenue money and how that has no impact on NIL. But what it does have impact on is how much you can pay coaches. And you look at what some of these schools with the new revenue deals are doing as far as Alabama gets that opening and they just sign this huge deal. They just go and pluck Washington's coach. And then Washington, who's moving to the Big Ten, has more money than Arizona, which will be in the Big 12. So they can just go pluck Arizona's coach. And so if a coach has success at Cal or Stanford, they're going to be plucked because not only are they in a conference that brings in less money, they're not even getting a piece of that, really, or in the case of Stanford and Cal, significantly less. So they're not going to have a ton of money to retain any type of success as far as program stability goes. And NIL, I mean, I still think it's the same. And the dollar doesn't go as far in those areas either. So, or I guess in Stanford and Cal, it goes a little further probably in SMU because there's no state income tax in Texas. But overall, I just think all three of them have put themselves in some pretty tough spots. So DC wants to know, what's the plan for Punter in 2024? I was expecting to see Pitt bring in someone through the transfer portal. Punting was dreadful in 2023, but I haven't heard much about it yet. And how much does the legacy factor come into play with keeping the existing punter as P1? All right, so the legacy factors, of course, Caleb Junko is the grandson of Coach Junko, who has been around the Pitt football program forever. I don't even have the number in front of me, but it's been a long time. Again, I'll start here, Chris, just because there's not a lot to update. I will say Pitt did offer one punter to our knowledge in the portal. His name is Jack Colbreth. is a 4-year starter at VMI. That's Virginia Military Institute, where I believe he was an FCS All-American or, one of the top punters at that level. I can pull up his Twitter now because I know but that offer came, I feel like that offer came in like December, and we haven't heard much since then. So it's been about a month since Pitt offered. His other offers are from Arkansas State, Mercer, Portland State, Georgia State, Charlotte, and UMass. So Pitt's his only Power 5 offer. I'm not sure if he's made an official visit or not. But in general, I think it's safe to assume that they're going to bring in a couple of guys, and it might not even be in the spring season. They might bring in one guy that we don't learn about until the next couple of weeks. But I mean, even last year, they brought in a guy at the end of, in spring ball, who was the backup kicker, and they brought in a guy to compete for punter. He didn't stick around after he lost the job. He just quit the team, which is kind of wild. But that's kind of how that position works. It's not going to get the attention that other positions get as far as recruiting on social media or even on the recruiting sites like Rivals or 247 or On3. But yeah, I'm sure they're going to bring in someone to compete with Caleb. I don't know how much, if at all, his last name has anything to do with him playing. I mean, I'm sure it helped him get a spot as a walk-on on the team. Like, it helped him get noticed. There's no doubt about that, just because, it's easy to notice people who have a connection to your school. But he earned that starting spot. He was the best punter on their team last year. It's just there weren't any better punters. So that's why he was playing. It wasn't because of his last name. Carter?
Yeah, it's more simple than just that. And like Pitt has these competitions amongst their punters to prove who's going to be the best. I think, but they think they've lacked consistency there, and that's an obvious thing to say about the punting position. That they've gone through the last 2 years. But if they're trying to seek consistency, I think that's where, getting a new special teams coach, you might come up with a new regimen to say, hey, because we've seen Caleb Junko have some good punts.
Yeah.
We've seen him do well. It's just about making it a more consistent thing, maybe refocusing these guys, getting that in there. But certainly looking for more talent in the transfer portal for punters, that's certainly a thing. But I also think it's something that you can probably find later in the year too. Like right now, Pitt's got a lot of other priorities. Like they had to lock down this offensive staff. They had to lock down an offensive coordinator. They just went and got a former 4-star quarterback recruit who's added to there. So like there's a ton of things that they've had to knock off their checklist. Punter might be a lot further down the list, and just talking with how people work in these types of offices and these types of positions. I think that's part of the challenge people don't take into effect. They're like, why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done that? You can only get so much done at one time. And all the things that they are getting done, I guarantee you there were several steps of other players and other coaches that they were talking to that we'll never know about that took up a lot of their time. So I think punter, a move might be coming at some point, but it's been not as higher up on the priority list for Pitt right now.
I'll also say you might see them bring in a new punter when they officially hire a special teams coach. That might play a factor in it as well. Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll move on now. Chris kind of talked about him just now, and we talked about him a lot last week. My guess is we're going to keep talking about him. How do you think the Alabama transfer, Eli Holstein, impacts the quarterback room or the quarterbacks already on the roster? Or you think any will hit the portal as a result? Chris, like I said, we talked about this a little bit last week. I guess this is a little bit of a different perspective on how it impacts the quarterbacks already on the roster. What say you?
I think that it's going to certainly be a challenge. Holstein's, I think his acumen is going to be the athleticism, the raw talent there. But I think that guys like Nate Yarnell and Christian Veyer, everyone's gonna be learning this offense at the same time, but they're not gonna have to adjust to the teammates. They're not gonna have to adjust to the atmosphere. And that's something that Holstein's going to have to do, and that's going to be a challenge for him. So I don't think he's going to be handed anything. I think that both Yarnell and Veyer are going to come into camp, fighting to win the spot. I wouldn't be shocked if after spring camp one of them leaves, because if one kind of wins the job, or if Holstein wins the job and the others and one's the number 2, I doubt that either of these guys want to be a number 3 quarterback for long, and kind of want to at least put themselves in the position to at least earn a starting job somewhere in college football before their time is up. So I think what it's really going to come down to is who can be number 1 or number 2. The top 2 guys will stay. The third guy will go.
Yeah. I think that really I don't think that there's a guarantee that Eli's going to be number 2 at the very minimum, but I think that by default with his youth, if you're not the starter, if you're Veyer or Yarnell, you're going to look at it and say, all right, well, if I'm not starting over this guy with the same amount of eligibility, I'm not the now, and I'm definitely not the future, so I need to leave. And that's kind of how it's going to play out. Like it could legitimately be like Yarnell, Veyer 1 and 2, and then Holstein 3. But just knowing that it's like, okay, well, if this is the guy, I don't want to have to be looking ahead and over my shoulder. It's all or nothing. But I think what Holstein brings, not just to the quarterback room, but to the entire offense, is competition. Everyone should be competing for a starting job, with the exception of maybe like Gavin Bartholomew, Kanate Mumfield, and Kenny Johnson. Everyone else, no one's job should be safe. You guys went 3-9 last year. Right. So a new quarterback coming in from the premier program in college football, and while I don't care if he played or not, the guy has been around what excellence is in this sport. He's been around the best coach in the history of this sport. He's had a taste of it. And so him coming in should elevate everyone's level of competition. The receivers should be fighting to build relationships, not only with him, but the other quarterbacks, because they don't know who the starter is going to be. The running backs need to learn the offense so they can find a way to fit in. When there's a quarterback contest, everyone else's game should step up as well. The line should be playing better to protect those guys so each one of them can have the most amount of time to throw the football. The run game needs to be on point so they can have a balanced offensive approach. The receivers need to be catching balls. And the defense needs to be playing balls to the wall because they need to make sure they get the best look possible out of all 3 of these guys. A quarterback competition brings the best out of everyone, or at least it should, in the team. And Pitt has a legitimate 3-man battle coming up in this spring season and in fall camp. So that's what I think Eli will bring to the table. Final question of the day comes from Ed. What letter grade would you give so far for the Pitt football program for its recruit signings and transfer acquisitions? I'll start here. I'm going to go B-. I think I gave that to the high school recruiting class. Here are my reasonings behind this. And I kind of think the portal's the same way. A big part of my letter grade for the high school recruiting class was they really didn't lose. I mean, they lost 2 4-stars throughout the whole entirety of it, but since the start of the regular season, they really only lost 1 significant guy, and they had another player at his position. So they did a good job of retaining talent. They added some strength in areas where they're already going to be strong at. But it's an above average class, or it's about a standard class for what Pitt normally brings in through high school recruiting, and the fact that they could maintain that despite having the worst season under Narduzzi in 9 years is impressive. So I gave that a B-. For the portal, same thing, B-. There's a lot of long-term projects in this group. You look, they've got 13 people coming in through the portal. Only 2 of these guys have 1 remaining year of eligibility. Everyone else has 2 or more years. And the biggest guys that they brought in my opinion, David, is it Ojigba or Jigby?
Jigby, I believe.
Jigby, the defensive end from Clemson, and of course Eli Holstein. Those are your 2 highest rated guys as far as recent high school recruits. They're both 4 years of eligibility. They're both basically freshmen. So these are long-term assets. I like some of the other guys as well. I think the linebacker from Ohio will be a nice addition. Lindum, I believe his name is, the corner out of Nebraska. That's like a plug-and-play guy immediately. That's corner. The lack of addition at corner is probably the reason I only have this group at a B-. It just feels really, the portal additions kind of just feel like more of a addition to the 2024 high school recruiting class. And while some of these guys have 2 years, or, like I said, only a couple of them have 1 year of remaining eligibility, a lot of them, they're going to be around for multiple seasons, and it's coming in with a new offensive staff. So it's just all kind of a whole new wave. I'm not sure how many of these guys are going to come in and be starters this upcoming season, but I think out of the 13 they added, maybe 7 of them play a significant amount of time. That's pretty good. So you add that in with your freshmen. And I give it a B-. What say you, Chris?
I mean, I agree with the B-, but I said this last year. We don't know what certain guys are going to look like actually out of the transfer portal. There were a lot of people that thought last year, Phil Jerkovic was a great addition in the transfer portal. So, Holstein could work out great. He could be another guy that's gone very soon, and it doesn't really do a whole lot. We can only grade them on what we know of them. And I certainly think that they've added guys that, at least move the needle in the conversation. I'll be very intrigued to see, how Nick James, adapts on this defensive line and what presence he brings up front for Charlie Partridge. I think there's a lot to be measured here, but yeah, a B- is fair because I think that they lost talent. When you look at the talent they lost, Sam Okunlola, Bengali Kamara, those are significant names that were guys that not only were important for the team going into last season, but I thought could have been important to the team if they stuck on for another year. So getting guys in the portal that can try to add back to things, Key Thompson's going to bring interesting experience. As a 3-star linebacker with his track record, he could probably bring some veteran experience to that group. Stuff like that's gonna count. So I think Pitt, again, B- is a very fair grade. But it all depends on how these guys embrace the program, embrace the challenges that they face, and what they mold into. I think that some people were excited for MJ Devonshire, but no one had the idea that he was going to become the guy that he did for Pitt, unless you were a big Aliquippa fan or you were a big Pitt fan hoping for the best. But he came in, he became a number 1 corner, and now he's going to be a legitimate NFL draft pick.
Yeah, I think the best way to sum it up is the moves Pitt has made this offseason, be it high school recruiting, be it transfer portal, be it assistant coach hiring. They might not show up in 2024 necessarily, but I think that what could have taken place is the building of a new foundation. A whole bunch of new guys coming in to learn an offense together and a replenishing of depth and young, raw talent in some of the biggest strengths of the program, especially in the defensive line. I think we saw that last year at the D-line where so many guys had been there for so long and maybe they needed a little bit of a reset there. And with all of these young defensive linemen coming in through high school, and then you add in James and Ojigbe, I mean, there's a lot to like. It's just, will it happen in 2024? I would probably guess not, but this might be an offseason we look back at 2 years from now, maybe even 3, and say, well, that's kind of where it all started. So, and that's probably the most reasonable hope for Pitt fans. I don't think that this group alone is going to be like what we saw with basketball last year, where it's like they brought in these guys and the winning started. Like, I don't know if that's going to be the case with this group, but I think it has the potential to be a very big first building block into what could be your next successful season as a program. Carter, any final thoughts as we wrap it up?
Just let us know if y'all coming to the Pitt-Syracuse game. Big game. We didn't get into the basketball questions, but this is an important game for Pitt to bounce back. Syracuse also took a bit of a beating against North Carolina over the weekend. I was being nice. But, Pitt's coming off their own beatdown at the hands of Duke. Syracuse, these are going to be 2 teams looking to kind of get their groove back and trudge forward. Pitt also looking for revenge after they dropped what was a first half lead going into the second half against Syracuse. And this time at home, I think it's going to be a very interesting statement that Pitt can make with this game either direction.
Throw the record books out the window, Carter.
There you go.
These 2 teams, they do not like each other.
Hit
that subscribe button if you haven't already, and keep tuning into the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel and podcast network. There's some other pretty big Pittsburgh sporting events going on this week that we will be either recapping or previewing potentially for another weekend ahead. We'll have all of that here on this channel. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.